Europe's next unicorns won't be trapped in a single sector.
They're not pigeonholed by their sector. They're thinking extremely big in terms of gov, plus health, plus defense, plus AI, plus robotics.
But there's a $1 trillion problem standing in their way.
If they're going to need $1 billion to win, where are they going to get their Series B and Series C capital?
Will Wells, former founder turned deep tech partner at Speedinvest, has a framework for navigating this complexity.
One thing I learned from Ravi at Lightspeed, he always talked about inevitable truths.
His test for $1 billion deep tech, radical simplicity.
If you can't describe the product to your generalist colleagues, it's probably not worth investing. Either you haven't understood it or the founder that you spoke to hasn't described it well either.
But for Will, this isn't just about returns. It's about defending what matters most.
I'm passionate about defending Western democracy, and freedom is not free. And
The mission that drives everything he does.
for me, that's the heart of deep tech, and that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Discover the inevitable truths shaping Europe's deep tech future and why the next wave of founders will transcend every boundary we know.
Before we start the show, a quick note. If you're building or running a fund, you know it takes the right partners. At EUVC, we only work with sponsors we truly believe should be part of your tech stack. Please do take a moment to hear about them. And if you do, reach out, mention EUVC. It's the best way you can support what we do. Thank you so much. First up, ACE Alternatives. Every fund manager needs clean operations behind the scenes. From fund admin to tax and compliance, ACE handles it all across VC, PE, private debt, and real assets. They're trusted by some of the best investors in the world, and if you want peace of mind and a scale-ready back office, ACE should be part of your stack. Finding deals and managing your portfolio is at the heart of running a fund. Synaptic helps you discover startups before others do, and Portfolio IQ keeps your portfolio data sharp and ready for LPs. Together, they're essential tools for modern fund managers. When it comes to legal, you need a team that truly knows venture. Haynes Boone supports LPs, GPs, startups, and scale-ups across the full fund lifecycle. Smart managers make Haynes Boone part of their stack. We have two at EUVC. Tech Barbecue. Oh my God, who doesn't love barbecue? Europe's startup scene meets the loudest, friendliest family reunion ever at Tech Barbecue. From Nordic founders to global VCs, this is where ideas catch fire and relationships get real. If you're building or backing in Europe, Tech Barbecue is where you want to show up. And hey, if you've got a big fun announcement coming up, want to hit the headlines, or just want to tell your story out, do reach out to us because we'd love to help. And we've got some killer partners to help you get in the right media places. They've helped us land Bloomberg, CNBC, Financial Times, Forbes, and many more for the EUVC Summit, and we'd love to do the same for you.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Today, I am incredibly thrilled to welcome Will Wells, an operator turned VC, and now stepping in as the deep tech partner at Speedinvest. Will is also formerly the founding CEO behind Hummingbird Technologies, an AI-powered space-based regenerative agriculture startup that exited to Agreena in 2022, and since then has become a seasoned deep tech investor leading frontier tech with famed firms like Firstminute and Lightspeed. Will, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So Speedinvest is a house that is a very good friend of the EUVC podcast. So tell me a bit about joining Speedinvest.
Well, look, I can't wait. I joined officially on 1st of September, so I've been enjoying a bit of gardening leave. And, I'm very humbled and honored to take over from Rick, who's leaving as the deep tech partner, an old friend of mine, and can't wait to lead that team at Seed and also to help Oliver build out the growth investing function. But look, it's a cracking firm and brand, and there's some super bright people there, and I am just so excited about kind of the deep tech opportunity set in Europe over the next few years. So I think I've gone to a good home.
So let's get into it. I first want to ask you about the experience building Hummingbird, of course, raising Series A and scaling and ultimately exiting. Could you tell me a bit about how that has shaped your way to now be a partner and supporting founders as a VC?
Look, I mean, it was 10 years ago when I started Hummingbird, and we built a very early autonomous system and AI stack for, it kind of is actually an Agtech company. So we were using drones and robots to help farmers see disease in their crops. It was trying to lower chemical usage. We then pivoted to satellites, and I went through a lot of the technical stack that is kind of permeated my whole space now, whether it's robotics or compute or defense. So there's some nice first-hand technical stuff in there. I think it's really the empathy. I made all the mistakes that you could possibly make as a first-time founder. I did some bad hires, had some moments of bad management, and made a ton of product errors. And I can definitely look founders in the eye and sort of say that I've been there, and I've raised a Series A, and we got to sort of 60, 70 people before we exited. But I think it really helps to have been in the engine room.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me a bit about your journey as an investor with other firms.
Yeah, well, look, I sold Hummingbird in 2021, 22, and it was really a soft landing. We were saved by a Danish company, you'll be glad to know, Agreena. And, I was doing some angel investing, and Firstminute, who are just wonderful people, said, "Do you want to come and, lead deep tech?" And I sort of never looked back. And, 4 very happy years there and at Lightspeed, and I sort of learned from the best. I'm very privileged at Lightspeed to be part of the same team that had backed Anduril and SpaceX and all of these generational companies. So I really, really learned what good looked like. I had previously been an investor. I ran a hedge fund, but this was a sort of like post-founder, amazing journey in venture, and got the opportunity to do some awesome deals across the deep tech stack. So I'm forever grateful to those, GPs at those funds for giving me a shot to lead again.
Then tell me, Will, because everyone comes with a thesis and a thought and a view on the market. I know one of the places where you think there's most opportunity is between the buckets, so to say. So deep tech is not just one vertical, but rather it's putting together AI hardware, the fusion of science, strategy, and sovereignty.
So I think that Europe is behind the US, but it's also younger. So if you look at things like novel AI, you've got companies like Wave, amazing autonomous driving business, the Firstminute actually backed. And then in space, you've got the exploration company, and you've got Helsing in defense and various others in quantum, etc. I think where the US have just absolutely smashed it out of the park is companies like Palantir and Tesla and SpaceX that are really transcend the buckets. They're not pigeonholed by their sector. They're thinking extremely big in terms of gov plus health plus defense plus AI plus robotics. And I think that's deep within their talent stack as well. You meet engineers there. They're sort of engineers at Tesla have been doing like LiDAR for 12 years, and they're thinking about so many use cases. And I think we're going to see a really exciting moment in a few years' time in Europe where all of these ecosystems, whether it's, the Northvolt graph core ones that didn't quite make it, or the Helsing sort of Spotify type ones that have made it, those guys are all going to start businesses. And, we've seen the Lovables and the NANs. And I think those second time DNA folks with the ability to think really big are going to create the companies of the next 25 years. That's my prediction.
Tell me a bit about, because I actually think maybe a bit counterintuitive to the deep tech space, because at least in deep tech, you often see the companies come out of the more research heavy areas and not necessarily have exited founders or successful company builders with them from the get-go. So talk a bit about that.
I'll take a recent example. So if you look at the sort of CDTM, ETH ecosystems, you've got some just insane technical talent, right? Think about Proxima Fusion or Black Forest Labs. Now, you still need to raise a lot of money. In fact, you need to raise even more money for deep tech than you do in other areas. And I think it's about having both skill sets on the bench. So for every, imagery, vision, PhD, building and robotics, you slightly need a sort of killer fundraiser alongside them, or they need to be both. I think that's that's a sort of duopoly skill set that Europe is still getting there, like getting used to. But again, it's super exciting.
I have a question, which I don't know how you'll react to. Some people think that we in Europe are lacking big bets from the get-go. And you just described some that have truly had big bets, like Proxima Fusion, which from the get-go was a massive funding round. I'd love to hear how you think about that, how you think Speedinvest should think about that, because Speedinvest is, of course, a behemoth of a fund with 500 million in total. But at the same time, Speedinvest, at least to my knowledge, has not done a ton of the really big pre-seed rounds or seed rounds right from the get-go. How do you think about that?
So look, I think the surface area that Speedinvest covers means that not only are they backed some fantastic businesses already, but we should in theory be in the best ones in the years to come. I think that they're set up to win, the team structures. And candidly, the AUM is also getting there, right? So I think that's doubly positive. I also believe that some of the really big foundational bets that we've seen in Europe are paying off on paper, and maybe the industry will become more bold. I think we'll see. I think we'll see the pack move.
And do you come in with this vision or this view that, yeah, I think the next opportunity lies in making these big bold bets from the start?
I think so. I think that's a shared vision with my sort of new Speedinvest colleagues. I think the one challenge, this is very unique to deep tech, is it's fine to have a bold vision early on, right? Like we would like to all think that we would back a Helsing or a Wave if we saw their pre-seed deck. The big question is, if they're going to need $1 billion to win, where are they going to get their Series B and Series C capital? And I don't think Europe is set up for that yet. But I'm also loath to be too sort of Europe, US focused in my thinking, because all of the best European founders are capable of raising big money in the US anyway, and naturally they have customers there. So it's just much more fluid than I think.
I think the relevant conversation when it comes to being able to do big rounds is in the very early stages, because once you are Series B, you should be able to raise that money from any global leading investor because you're on the radar anyway. But it's more that what do you do in the very early stages where there's not all these proof points, and it really requires that consortium of investors come together and make that bold bet from day one.
For sure. And I think that, within deep tech, you have varying degrees of that problem. So nuclear fusion and designing accelerators and building reactors and magnets. I mean, this is a very long technical roadmap with almost zero commercial proof points. The counter is that cheap, abundant energy at low cost is like infinite demand, right? So there is a market for it. What I like about defense is that you actually have very short commercial timelines because of Ukraine, sadly, and because of European peace dividend deletion and getting back up to 5% of defense spend, where we're actually seeing some very exciting deep tech being built and deployed in super short timelines. You think about anyone building Envision, autonomous system, shields. It's crazy if you think of the Cambridge Aerospaces and Auterions and others, and like just the speed with which some of them have scaled. It's really, really exciting.
Talk to me for a second about, because I think you said something important there, and you also probably hinted at what your answer will be before. I would love to hear how you think about picking sides, because geopolitics and making money and then taking sides can sometimes run quite contrary to each other. It's not always a good idea to be too idealistic when you're trying to make money. How do you think about that?
So my views are my own on this answer. But look, I'm passionate about defending kind of Western democracy, and freedom is not free. And sadly, the world is becoming more hostile. And at the same time, it doesn't get me out of bed in the morning, the idea of sort of backing weapons companies and stuff like that. But I think most of the defense tech ecosystem that you see have defense in mind. And for better or worse, we have an incumbent stack, aka $2 million tanks or $1 billion aircraft carriers that are just not fit for purpose. And, Europe may get up, or NATO may get up to $1 trillion of budget spent. And in my view, almost all of that should be on new tech. So the TAM expansion is phenomenal. So that, I do think about it economically like that. And I think in moral terms, I have my own views on, on a democratic country that neighbors Europe has been invaded by a dictator who has done that on immoral grounds. So I think that defending that country, defending our way of life is important to me. Like, I know that that's not a view that's shared by past and present colleagues, like, unanimously.
It's a tough nut to crack. And that's also why I was curious to hear your take on it. Tell me a bit more about strategic sovereignty as an opportunity in general.
Yes, I think so. Maybe sort of taking it conversation sort of almost back from the front lines. I think a lot of what I think about in sovereign terms, stuff like how can we be energy resilient, or how can we have faster compute, and whether that's at a semiconductor level using optical processing or photonics or something novel, or AI inference chips, or using new energy forms such as small modular reactors. I think the bit that really excites me in sovereign terms is the new infrastructure and the new picks and shovels layers that we're going to need, whatever we do, whether we get to AGI or whether we want to defend Europe. It's giving us the base that is required, that's efficient. I think that's, for me, that's the heart of deep tech, and it's kind of why that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Where do you fall on the axis of thesis-driven? This is what I think will lead the charge. These are the areas where I think we need to win, versus seed and pre-seed is so early. It's about finding the best opportunity with the best founders and backing them. I personally have no view on what sector that is.
Well, I'm going to tell you one of my tricks, but I think you have to have longitude and latitude there. So a bit like with Lightspeed and Firstminute, Speedinvest has an amazing sourcing network, right? And high sort of NPS scores with its existing hundreds of founders, right? So good deals are going to arrive on their laps, like not without work, but you have to be reactive, right? And you can't just say, I'm going to do a quantum deal next or a hydrogen deal the week after. You've got to, within deep tech, we've got to be open to it all. And candidly, there's going to be stuff we've never seen before. I mean, that's even better, right? At the same time, I do believe I am massively a thesis-driven investor, and the team at Speedinvest, we've already decided what we're going to work on in September and October, and probably go really, really deep on compute. There's the inbound chairman, Young, is a semiconductor kind of top 5 semiconductor guy in the Valley, and it'll be a privilege to work with him as well. So I think compute, we're going to go really deep and look at everything from data centers to energy resilience to cybersecurity threats to chip design, because then when you do see something, you can strike quickly because you've got conviction. And I think where VCs can get deep tech wrong is you haven't done the groundwork and you're in a very short space of time having to explain a nuclear fusion deal to your colleagues. Like you can sort of fall over your own feet.
Tell me, Will, about how you form theses. This is one of the things I love the most in venture as well. I have no thesis myself. That's why I invest as an LP. But I would love how do you form it? What are the key frameworks, the key thoughts around how you build a thesis out and come to the conclusion that this is a space that's worthwhile looking more into? Because you make a big decision just by zeroing in.
I think one thing I learned from Ravi at Lightspeed, he always talked about inevitable truths. And I think that, imagine you had the macro framework and it was solid and there was an inevitable truth, whether it's about AI or defense spending. I think those are your guardrails. And then I think within that, you then have to be extremely formulaic and think about which parts of the technical stack, whether it's in autonomy or whether it's in semiconductor infrastructure or whether it's in energy, like which bits of the cake do you want exposure to, like, and then what are the business models, and candidly, where are the customers like going to buy it? I think, these are like first principles sort of strategic reviews, but I do that for every single deep tech bucket, and I do it half yearly. Probably should do it more. And I also revisit it, because if I look at what I was focused on within climate in 2022, I was basically wrong on some stuff. What I now call soft climate, whereas hard climate has continued to do really well, but I think soft climate is dead. I mean, I built a company in it, so I kind of know.
I was I was actually about to bring up your past experience with Hummingbird, because I'm sure that there's a bunch of learnings around the brittleness of a sector that can seem incredibly booming, and then all of a sudden stuff starts happening.
Yes, and like we were extremely early, like twice. So we were ridiculously early with autonomy and robotics and early ML. It was like cat dog type algorithms, and which is great. And then we sort of created regen ag MRV, which is now in a whole industry, which is so the measurement side. And then it got really hyped up, and now it's, I believe it will survive, but there's obviously been a huge shakeout for lots of reasons that all your listeners know. If I was being really cynical, I'd say I probably missed one of the most glaring technical opportunities like in 100 years, which is we should have just, I don't know, built a robotics business or built a drone for defense company. I mean, I was, I think, one of Quantum Systems' biggest customers in 2017. They weren't even doing defense. I mean, so it was staring at us in broad daylight, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. And it also it was just fun to have impact. And
what do you think blocked you from seeing that opportunity? Was it the passion around the ideal, or?
I think, for better or worse, like I'm passionate about farming and food and those supply chains, which are just fundamentally broken. And I think the further I got down this chemical wormhole of, I just couldn't believe it. I was like, these chemical companies are paid, or agronomists are paid to put more chemicals. It was like worse than pharmaceuticals. The more I got into that, I sort of, I became sort of fervently, I guess, just passionate about trying to solve that problem with tech. It's actually a bit crazy to think that like, it's not, the penetration of technology in those sectors is still minute. And what I call these like distribution actors are they're blocking still.
Let me pull a really crazy question on you, and one that is hard to answer without getting your hands in something you don't necessarily want to. The MAHA movement is one that we don't talk much about in Europe. So the Make America Healthy Again movement.
Oh yeah.
I'd love your take as a Agtech, food tech nerd. What are your views, not necessarily on the movement, but are they touching the right dials? What should we learn in Europe? Is there anything to learn? Because we're not in a better place as the US when it comes to food systems.
I wish that every child was taught how to grow vegetables at school, because my mum used to be a chef and is now a gardener, and we grew up eating stuff that we'd grown in the garden. And I think sort of what you put in your mouth either kills you or cures you. In my late 20s, I had cancer and got very into this, of course, as lots of patients do, and sort of trying to figure out kind of what could I eat that would get me better again, or maybe what was I eating that got me sick. And I definitely don't have the right answers, but like I know you can't go wrong. You stick to the basics.
Yeah, I love that. I love the rules of, if your grandmother wouldn't recognize it, don't eat it. Such stuff like that. Don't eat from middle aisle.
This is like a nice kind of, anti-AI agent, super intelligence thing. It's just like, do you know what? Unplug it at the wall, go outside, grow some carrots, and then eat them.
I think that's wise. Okay, let me get into something else. I want to ask you a bit about leveraging the Speedinvest machine. Speedinvest, of course, is known in Europe by most probably as the most people-heavy firm. There's I don't think there's many that have almost an employee per million under management. No, they don't. I think it's maybe an employee per 10, but it's very impressive. It's a very different model than most have built. Oliver, of course, have spoken both on this podcast and written about it before, but I'd love to talk to you a bit about how you leverage that, especially within deep tech, of course.
Yeah. I mean, look, the sector teams and that kind of deep vertical, almost autonomous decision-making kind of engine is very powerful. And I mean, it kind of means you've got a functioning starship with 6 very fit engines that are like going deep on all of the areas at all times. That is an advantage for me. Like, it has to be.
But it also changes you incredibly, right? Your process from if you were just in quotation marks with a team where you had 500 million split on 6 partners or something like that, a couple of support people, and that was it, versus this machine.
Yes, and it does. And I also just to comment on your sort of the operational support and the vertical team. I mean, from my own DD, that's reflected in, founder feedback and all of the corporate introductions and the reach and the international scale. I mean, it does count for a lot when you're in the trenches with your portfolio companies. And I kind of learned from the best seeing that Firstminute and Lightspeed as well. So I can see how it works. I also believe you'd have to ask Oliver this, but they have like a very clear AUM strategy. They have over $1 billion under management. Last fund was 350. And like, they are set up to win as they get bigger, right? And whether that's geographically or with different strategies or bigger on growth, like, they've got the bones. That said, I don't think anyone in venture like knows what will happen to venture over the next 10 years, right? And I think there's going to be some fantastic new models, right? Lots of things to learn from colleagues that aren't necessarily on the investment team as well. My like greatest ally at one of my funds was actually the talent manager, who kind of like, if you're trying to get close to a founder and they're still hiring a VP of Eng, like, that is probably the most value add contribution you can make, right?
Tell me also a bit about being the deep tech lead within a firm that is generalist. How do you make sure you, first and foremost, maybe there's the who makes decisions, but then there's the how do you talk to the rest of the group? How do you make sure that the rest of the partnership understands to prioritize a deep tech deal that has 0 traction 5 years before they're going to hit anything versus a straight up B2B SaaS marketplace?
I think you have to be able to describe the product. And by virtue of that, which is very difficult when it's a complex kind of alternative materials business or a fusion business or a green chemical company. I mean, I think if you can't describe the product to your generalist colleagues, it's probably not worth investing. Either you haven't understood it, or the founder that you spoke to hasn't described it well either. As painful as it can be, that's a very good filter. I think that a lot of generalist funds have a default to kind of historic SaaS, with sort of now AI kind of focus, which is understandable and healthy. It's funny because at Firstminute, generalist fund, like, I don't know, Wave and NAN are 2 of their best investments. For me, those were like very frontier tech businesses, and ditto at Lightspeed has done some incredible frontier deals. So I think it's hard, and you have to be patient, and you have to be a good storyteller, and you have to describe the product perfectly. But I think, there's ways not to swim upstream all the time.
The decision-making inside Speedinvest, do you have a lot of capital per partner or space, or is it 500 million? Keep saying 500 million, but that's because I bundle the early stage fund and the later stage. But tell me, how do you make those decisions in the committee?
Well, I mean, I haven't started yet, so whatever I say will be wrong. But there is an allocation, and it's not like so rigid that it can't change. And that allocation gives teams autonomy. And I think that's reflected in decision making and process and ICs. That said, I believe I think it has to be fluid and cooperative, and there's so much stuff that sits in the middle of, let's say, two different teams, right? So I think it's a moving feast to some extent. I'll talk again in a year and I'll tell you a more concrete answer.
That's a deal. I would love to continue the talk in the year. Tell me a bit about what you see coming ahead for us in Europe in deep tech, 3-5 years when you're looking out. What sectors do you think we'll be leading on?
I think, look, defense we've talked about, but there are going to be some big companies built, I think, in autonomy and probably robotics. I think biosecurity is just a horrible thing that's coming up. This needs to be sovereign. And I think unlike other deep tech verticals where you can outsource compute to the US, I think there will have to be European champions there. I think that's super exciting for me. I think that Europe has a natural advantage in like lots of areas, right? There are some really big energy companies, and we've seen some awesome sort of AI for drug development, Alkin type, Cradle, Basecamp type businesses as well. So I think it's being self-reflective enough in Europe to sort of triple down on the areas that we're already quite good at, and then hopefully build some of those multi-generational businesses that I described that can then transcend the buckets.
Tell me, Will, I'd love to ask you about biosecurity. So you mentioned biosecurity, sovereign compute, and energy. I think both of them are really interesting. So let's dive into each of them. If we start with biosecurity, and you said that this is going to definitely increase in importance, I would love to hear why you think so, and exactly how do you, to those that don't know biosecurity. I actually come from a call with a friend who is organizing a big biosecurity invite-only conference. So for that reason, I'm quite primed to talk about this. So curious to hear your take on biosecurity.
My rudimentary understanding of biosecurity and the risks, a lot of them are rooted in kind of perhaps some of the more positive things that AI is doing at the moment. So can you take AI, build an enormous model, and come up with, I don't know, some sort of oncological therapy for a patient with, previously untreatable cancer? Now that same therapeutical data engine can be applied to a pathogen or some kind of, virus or an invasive species. And, whether it's a sort of fungal disease for a crop and that wipes out, a country's harvest, and then that makes them vulnerable. And then there's a precious metals deal. I'm sort of making up the sort of movie scenario, or whether there's a COVID type direct threat. I think, both are fairly potent, and it is probably a case of like bad actors. I hope it doesn't happen, but I don't think the conversations are happening enough. Like I spend time with folks at Palantir who work with the NHS, and I think hospitals and so forth are aware of the threat. I don't think there have been like institutional learnings from COVID that like make us safe. I'm keen to do more work on that area. I don't know what you think.
Maybe a few learnings around censorship and COVID, but other than that, I won't comment too much on biosecurity because I'm honestly in no way an expert here. Then let's talk sovereign compute. When how do you define sovereign compute? Where are the edge cases, the scenarios, and the areas to really look out?
We can maybe break it down into processing and energy and maybe real estate. So the sort of the data centers and so forth. I think it's very difficult space thinking about sovereign definitions. So you take a sort of what is a sovereign definition? Is it an ally? Is it your own country? Is it something in between? I think like the reason why NVIDIA is valued at $4 trillion, and the reason why we've got, $3 trillion worth of announced capex on data centers, like that has led to like insane consolidation at a chip level. And at a compute level. And like that is probably not going to change in the next year. But a lot of people are like quite literally chipping away at parts of that. And I think that there is a willingness from gov and big corporates to maybe pay a premium for a different type of compute. I mean, there's a fantastic company came out of Oxford in the UK called Fractile, and they do AI inference chips, and they just hired a couple of like veterans from, you know, big tape outs in the US, and like, you know, they will get there because there's an appetite for new types of compute and to have a go with new chips, but it's very expensive and it's going to take a lot of money to get there. So there are like big hurdles to get over that concentrated river.
And now I have a question that will fall very much at home with you, I think, which is you talked about energy and energy independence and resilience. I've been thinking a bit about it. We obviously know that AI is very power hungry, so the rush to generate more power is very high in all of the major economies. The US has chosen a path of anything that is energy we are happy about, as long as it's not wind. Solar is okay, but wind is not. It kills the birds. I'd love to ask you, what do you think is Europe's route to energy resilience?
I think it's very different country by country, but I think there's a unanimous buy-in that one cannot rely on sort of on current energy sources. And I'm super optimistic when I look at what solar's done in various geographies. And, you know, there've been some big companies, the NPALs of this world, and all the associated battery storage, both at a grid level, people like Flower, and even at a residential level. And like that is working as a technology set. It's cheap enough now. There are consumers that will buy it. The market is growing now. It hasn't been a straight line either. There's been a bit of pain. And I think where subsidies have been removed, it's just been a real circuit breaker for progress. But I think that like that transition is structural, and we just need more of it. That said, I remember maybe a year ago listening to a talk where someone was describing a 1 gigawatt data center and thinking that's absolutely crazy amount. And of course, now you read about 100 gigawatts, and those numbers are like outstripping any kind of solar and battery sort of. They're outstripping kind of that capacity build out on the storage and the solar front. So we need more, and we need it to be symbiotic growth between the two. For me, this is one of the best opportunities for investing. And, you know, there's some very exciting things happening in geothermal as well, and natural gas and biomass. And I think it's sort of like you have to assume there's no green premium and zero subsidies. And then you have to look at the sort of very basic costs and, you know, is someone doing something with a technical advantage? And like, it's very first principles, but there are some good companies that fit those criteria in Europe today.
What do you think most people, most generalist firms tend to struggle with when we're talking about deep tech?
So historically, it was kind of a funky time horizon. It's going to raise too much money. It's going to be too hard, but it's the time horizon. Does that even fit fund cycles? I think we're gently being disproven on the time horizon piece.
Well, yes, either because deep tech is happening faster or because non-deep tech is just proving to take 14 years anyways. So
I believe, I mean, I haven't looked at the latest Cambridge Associates comparison, but I think over time, the regressional data does support it. There are kind of, you can have outsized returns inside a fund cycle. That's normal. Like, companies in deep tech need more money, but like the return side is good.
Well, they do and they don't, right? Because if you have two scooter companies running up against each other, no deep tech in that, pretty expensive.
That is true. Although my my line bill's getting pretty big in London these days. And I think they're in the black for the second quarter in a row. So, maybe that's a function of time. But what's interesting about deep tech is look at something like nuclear. The winners in fusion and fission kind of listed already, and that was well inside of 10 years. So I do think there's almost like a pre-revenue public market route for some deep tech sectors. That's probably rarer than not. I think defense, we're going to see a lot of M&A. I think, the foundational models and a lot of the AI infra, right? They've proven that you can go at a pace that's like quite candidly, like quite frightening. I worry less about like the generalist exit time horizon piece. I think that a lot of deep tech is just hard. I worry more about sort of customer product basics than some of the sort of like historic time horizon things.
Yeah, I think honestly the Speedinvest route to being able to grapple with deep tech and perform well as a generalist firm is one of those that has a better chance of performing very well, because you have the ability to build out a team that has the capacity to actually act in a very difficult space and different space, where you don't build experience to diligence a nuclear deal over the weekend. That takes some time, and it takes a breadth of team. So I think there's something very interesting there.
I hope so. And look, I mean, the incumbent team are super talented and very scientific. So I think with deep tech, you just can't get one person that's an expert in bio and energy and compute and defense. And, otherwise you'd be Leonardo da Vinci. So it is a team thing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today, Will, and congratulations on joining the Speedinvest team.
Thanks, Andreas.
Before we start the show, a quick note. If you're building or running a fund, it takes the right partners. At EUVC, we only work with sponsors we truly believe should be part of your tech stack. Please do take a moment to hear about them. And if you do, reach out, mention EUVC. It's the best way you can support what we do. Thank you so much. First up, Ace Alternatives. Every fund manager needs clean operations behind the scenes. From fund admin to tax and compliance, Ace handles it all across VC, PE, private debt, and real assets. They're trusted by some of the best investors in the world, and if you want peace of mind and a scale-ready back office, Ace should be part of your stack. Finding deals and managing your portfolio is at the heart of running a fund. Synaptic helps you discover startups before others do, and Portfolio IQ keeps your portfolio data sharp and ready for LPs. Together, they're essential tools for modern fund managers. When it comes to legal, you need a team that truly knows venture. Haynes Boone supports LPs, GPs, startups, and scale-ups across the full fund lifecycle. Smart managers make Haynes Boone part of their stack. We have two at EUVC. Tech Barbecue. Oh my God, who doesn't love barbecue? Europe's startup scene meets the loudest, friendliest family reunion ever at Tech Barbecue. From Nordic founders to global VCs, this is where ideas catch fire and relationships get real. If you're building or backing in Europe, Tech Barbecue is where you want to show up. And hey, if you've got a big fun announcement coming up, want to hit the headlines, or just want to tell your story out, do reach out to us, because we'd love to help. And we've got some killer partners to help you get in the right media places. They've helped us land Bloomberg, CNBC, Financial Times, Forbes, and many more for the EUVC Summit, and we'd love to do the same for you.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.